America has long been seen as the model of modern strength, a nation that dominates global finance, technology, military power, and cultural influence for nearly a century. But everything changes with time, and no empire stands outside that rule. What makes the current period so frightening is this: America's weakening is not happening through loud events. It's happening through movements too subtle for most people to notice, numbers shifting quietly, small cracks repeating, patterns forming beneath the surface. Like a massive skyscraper that begins to tremble slightly, no one pays attention. But the foundation has changed. To understand where America stands today, we must begin with one simple truth. Throughout modern history, the United States is the only nation that could borrow unlimited amounts of money without being punished by the market. The US dollar has been the center of global trade, and the world's trust in America has been almost absolute. But what no one expected was that this immunity would become a trap. When borrowing becomes too easy, borrowing becomes the default solution. And like a wealthy person who spends without thinking about tomorrow, America used debt as a machine to push its economy, stabilize society, and maintain global influence. But in the past 20 years, that model has begun to show cracks. The first warning sign is that debt growth has far outpaced GDP growth. This did not happen in a single year. It became a repeating pattern. Debt rises exponentially, while real economic growth moves slowly and unevenly. This creates a simple but undeniable truth: America is spending more than it can generate in new value. At the same time, the structure of American consumption has become distorted. Easy borrowing once fueled housing markets, car markets, and consumer spending. But at a certain point, borrowing no longer creates new consumption, it only pulls future income into the present. When an entire generation spends most of its paycheck paying interest just to get through each month, the purchasing power of the economy erodes from the inside. Instead of creating long-term growth, the system produces artificial growth, powered by credit rather than productivity. Another shift lies in America's declining productivity growth. After the explosive eras of the internet, smartphones, and early automation, the US lacks a new technological surge comparable in scale. Artificial intelligence, although promising, has not yet produced the widespread productivity boost that the internet once delivered. This means every dollar invested now creates less value than before. And when productivity fails to grow, all financial problems intensify: deficits, healthcare costs, welfare obligations, interest payments. A strong empire is not built on economics alone, it requires internal consensus. But American politics over the past 2 decades has become an arena of conflict. Congress is divided, states are divided, citizens are divided. At its most basic level, America has lost its ability to make long-term decisions. Every proposal involving debt, taxes, or reform becomes an endless battlefield. A nation cannot implement large-scale policies when half the country wants to move forward, the other half wants to go in the opposite direction, and neither side is willing to compromise. Meanwhile, the American infrastructure system, once a global pride, is deteriorating faster than it can be repaired. Bridges, highways, train stations, water systems, and power grids have exceeded their design lifespans. But public investment is delayed because budgets are strained. The result is that the richest country in the world now has infrastructure inferior to many smaller developed nations. This reduces competitiveness, slows productivity, and increases the cost of running the national economy. Another factor is demographic change. When America was young, its expanding workforce created strong GDP growth. But today, birth rates have fallen to their lowest levels in decades. The labor force no longer grows quickly, while the number of retirees grows rapidly. This creates a dual pressure: fewer workers supporting more beneficiaries. In the current model, social welfare costs grow faster than tax income, creating a structural imbalance that worsens annually. Socially, America is facing its highest level of inequality since the 1920s. The wealthiest group holds most of the assets, while the middle class, the heart of the US economy, is shrinking. When the middle class weakens, the country loses its foundation for stable, sustainable consumption. A society that relies on a small, wealthy segment to generate economic activity is fragile by design. What makes this decline especially dangerous is its silence. There is no dramatic collapse. No defining moment when people say, America has changed. Instead, there is a series of small shifts. Interest rates rise a little, debt rises a little, housing costs rise a little, benefits shrink a little. Every small shift seems harmless. But when combined, they form a persistent decline unnoticed by most people. And when you connect all the pieces, a clear picture emerges. America is entering the opening stage of a silent decline, a stage in which the surface still appears bright, but the interior has begun to hollow out. Not because of a sudden disaster, but because of hundreds of small warning signs converging. No empire collapses in one night. It collapses day by day through repeated miscalculations, slow adaptation, and the erosion of internal trust. This is the portrait of Part 1, the introductory phase, where the signs of weakening emerge, but the full severity remains unnoticed. If the first stage of America's silent decline is defined by economic imbalance and slow-moving structural cracks, then the second stage is defined by something deeper, the erosion of social cohesion, global influence, political stability, and the psychological foundation that once held the nation together. A country does not begin to fall apart when charts go down. It begins to fall apart when people stop believing the charts will ever go back up. One of the clearest long-term indicators of American decline is the collapse of trust. Trust in institutions, in media, in government, and even trust in one another. For decades, Americans believed their system, despite imperfections, was the best the world could offer. Today that belief has fractured. Surveys show that trust in the federal government has fallen to its lowest levels since such data was first recorded. The judiciary, once considered sacred, is now viewed as political. Elections are contested not just by candidates but by entire portions of the population. The media landscape is fragmented into ideological bubbles that no longer reflect a common reality. When a nation stops sharing the same truth, it stops sharing the same future. This erosion of trust creates a secondary effect: paralysis. A divided country cannot act collectively. No long-term budget reform, no healthcare reform, no immigration reform, no tax reform. Every major issue becomes a political battlefield where compromise is seen as defeat. In such an environment, governments do not govern for decades. They govern from one election cycle to the next. A nation without strategic planning is a nation that drifts. While the political system fractures, the social foundation begins to thin. The American middle class, once the engine of prosperity, is shrinking. The assumption that every generation will live better than the previous one, a core promise of the American dream, is fading. Homeownership, the traditional marker of stability, is slipping out of reach for millions of young Americans. Student debt traps young workers for decades. Healthcare costs consume savings at every income level. Everyday living has become a negotiation of sacrifices: less travel, less saving, fewer children, fewer dreams. In previous eras, American workers could look forward to a stable retirement. Today, retirement is becoming a luxury. Pension funds are under pressure. Social Security faces long-term sustainability challenges. Many older Americans must continue working far beyond traditional retirement ages, not out of desire but necessity. A society ages rapidly when its elderly cannot retire and its young cannot advance. Meanwhile, rural America and urban America are increasingly experiencing two different countries. In many rural regions, industries that once provided stable wages, manufacturing, mining, agriculture, have hollowed out, leaving behind declining towns with shrinking populations. In contrast, major cities concentrate wealth, talent, and opportunity, but also concentrate inequality, high living costs, and social tension. When regional gaps widen, national unity weakens. But internal fracture is only one part of the story. The second stage of decline becomes undeniable when external influence weakens. For decades, the United States shaped global rules, built institutions, and set the direction of global markets. But the world is changing, emerging economies are rising. Strategic rivals are establishing new trade routes, financial systems, and diplomatic alliances that reduce dependence on Washington. The US dollar remains dominant, but alternative systems are slowly forming, not to overthrow America immediately, but to reduce vulnerability to it. This trend is subtle, but historically, once it begins, it accelerates. Countries accumulate gold at record levels. Energy deals are negotiated in local currencies. International organizations no longer align automatically with US interests. These shifts do not mean the end of American leadership now, but they signal that the era of unipolar dominance is fading. The power of an empire weakens long before the empire realizes it. Militarily, America remains unmatched, but power projection alone cannot sustain global authority. Wars have become expensive, politically divisive, and strategically ambiguous. Domestic fatigue grows with every conflict. The cost of maintaining bases, fleets, and alliances stretches the budget further at a time when domestic needs are intensifying. Economically, the rise of other regions, especially Asia, changes global trade dynamics. Supply chains diversify. Manufacturing gradually shifts away. Technological competition intensifies. The U.S. no longer holds unquestioned dominance in semiconductors, AI, or advanced materials. Innovation continues, but the gap narrows. And when the technological gap narrows, the influence gap narrows with it. Yet perhaps the most powerful sign of decline is psychological. A nation's strength depends on the stories it tells itself. Stories of possibility, upward mobility, optimism. But over the past decade, America's dominant narrative has shifted. Instead of hope, there is anxiety. Instead of confidence, there is resentment. People feel the system is stacked, unfair, and unchanging. When belief fades, ambition fades. And when ambition fades, productivity, creativity, and innovation follow. This psychological shift becomes visible in migration patterns. For generations, America was the world's magnet, attracting talent, entrepreneurs, scientists, and dreamers. Today, immigration remains strong, but the perception has changed. The U.S. is no longer the automatic first choice for global talent. Countries like Canada, Singapore, Germany, and South Korea are increasingly competing for the same minds. And when a nation loses its advantage in attracting the best, it loses its engine for future growth. Internally, Americans themselves are migrating, not internationally but domestically. People move away from high-cost states to cheaper ones, from cities to suburbs, from suburbs to rural areas, and sometimes the opposite. These shifts reflect deeper instability, people searching for affordability, security, and opportunity that no longer feel evenly distributed. As all of this unfolds, the silent collapse deepens. None of these trends create a sudden breaking point, but together they form a slow-moving downward spiral. Decline is not a cliff, it is a slope. And America has begun sliding down that slope without enough consensus or energy to climb back up quickly. Yet the most striking part of the second stage is the growing mismatch between perception and reality. On the surface, the stock market reaches new highs. Corporate profits remain strong. Cities bustle with economic activity. But these metrics mask the deeper erosion underneath. A rising stock market does not reflect living standards. Corporate profits do not indicate national resilience. A booming tech sector does not fix regional decline. It is entirely possible for an empire to appear successful long after it has begun to weaken. History teaches that by the time an empire recognizes its decline, the process is already irreversible. Rome still celebrated military victories while its currency debased. Britain still controlled trade routes while its manufacturing base crumbled. Spain still expanded overseas while hollowing out at home. The United States today still dominates headlines. But headlines are not foundations. The second stage of America's silent collapse is not a crisis of economics alone. It is a crisis of identity, unity, direction, and belief. A nation that once moved with certainty now hesitates. A society built on confidence now doubts. A global power that once led effortlessly must now defend its position from rivals and from itself. And decline, once it becomes psychological, accelerates. People invest less. Families plan less. Governments hesitate more. Businesses take fewer risks. The entire system shifts from expansion to preservation. Preservation is not collapse, but it is not growth either. This is where America now stands, in the deepening stage of a silent decline, not fallen, not collapsing tomorrow, but drifting, eroding, losing cohesion, losing clarity. A giant whose movements are slower, whose purpose is less certain, whose future is no longer guaranteed. And like every empire before it, the end does not arrive with thunder. It arrives quietly, while the world looks elsewhere, and while the nation convinces itself that everything is still the same.